Welcome, everybody. I'm Peggy Gatermeyer. I'm the McGee Fellow in Bioethics and Aging here at the Hope and Healing Center. And I recognize some of the faces here. If you haven't been here before, the Hope and Healing Center is a mental health outreach here on the St. Martin's campus. And we have classes and mental health coaching and community education and professional education and research. So my role's a little different in that I'm doing all of those things in the bioethics and aging area. So we've got a lot of programs going on. This is one of our Aging Well series, and starting tomorrow for 4 weeks, we're going to have an Aging with Grace series. For those of you who are here today, tomorrow is not a complete redundancy to today because what I'm going to be talking about is healthcare rights and responsibilities. Discussing those forms and booklets they ask you to sign when you go to the doctor's office or get admitted to the hospital, of which certainly end-of-life decision-making is one piece, but there are lots of other pieces that go along with that. And then in subsequent weeks, we'll be discussing legal, living, and financial aspects of aging. And that's going to be from 10 to 11:30 over in the Payne building at St. Martin's on the second floor in room 217. So I invite you to join us for that if you're available. We've got like I said, lots of things going on. I'm working on some research, and hopefully there'll be more on that later. But it is my absolute great pleasure today to introduce Rebecca as your speaker. She is an incredible person, very, very talented. She is an assistant professor in family medicine and the associate director of the McGovern Center in Humanities and Ethics at the University of Texas Health Science Center. And so she teaches in the medical school, she teaches in the graduate school of biomedical sciences, and she's also chair of one of UT's, they're called institutional review boards. And those are the boards that review all of the research that's going to be conducted with human and animal subjects. And it's a very important task because we need research, but we also need to make sure that the research is safe for our people that are participating. And she also does clinical ethics consultations in the Health Science Center. So she has a law degree from the University of Texas, South Texas College of Law. Did I remember that correctly? Yes. And she has a master's degree in the medical humanities from the University of Texas Medical Branch. That's where I got my PhD. The medical humanities program is just an amazing program that integrates all the various aspects of medical humanities that don't include the science part, but the pieces that we need to think about, which is how we treat people and the ethics and the history and that sort of thing. So prior to joining UT, Rebecca was with Shell Oil, so we share that energy industry background. And so please join me in welcoming her and ask lots of questions.
So I take it this is on, it is. I'm absolutely honored to be here, and as Peggy said, I hope to have a discussion with you. I've got a lot of videos to show you, a lot of things to bring up, but I really want this to be a conversation between us because there's so many unsettled questions, and I'm going to bring those unsettled questions up with you today. Before you all were given the legal documents, and we'll talk about the legal documents as we go through this. And so this is really for you to peruse afterwards. Feel free to shuffle through them, but I'm gonna mention two of them in particular. But again, if you have any conversations during the presentation every time, please feel free to raise your hand and pose them. What I'm going to do is I want to go through the history of advanced care planning because A, I'm a history buff, and B, what happened in the past informs what's going to happen in the future. And it's a pretty torrid past, and I think it's a really fascinating past. I also then am going to go through the tools that have been developed in response to our historical past. And then I want to critique them and talk about, so what does the future hold? Oops, that was not what I had hoped. So I want to frame this first by showing you two very short video clips. And I'm hoping this works. And it's not going to work. Oh, no. I just tested this. Okay, I am always prepared for technology not to work. So the first video clip is from one of my favorite all-time shows, ER. And it is a reenactment of a scene in a hospital room where a woman is clearly dying, and her husband is by the side pleading with the doctor that, no, keep doing something. You can't let her die. And the woman is clear enough to know that she's dying. But the husband is not there, is not with her. And I wanted to use it to illustrate one of the huge problems we have is this discrepancy between what we as individuals may want and what our loved ones may want. The second clip, they're not that great, or I'd be trying to figure out how to do this. The second one is from a show I've actually never seen, and I couldn't even tell you the name of it. But what's so poignant about it is it's a scene in a hospital room, a dying patient with cancer. She knows she's dying, and in this scene, it's the doctor who's saying, don't give up. Don't give up. We can do more. We can do more. And if any of you have read Atul Gawande's Being Mortal, he talks about that in spades, especially as it relates to the practice of oncology. Physicians are trained. Do we have any physicians in the room? Or any healthcare workers? Physicians are trained to do. They're not trained to pull back. And so, again, we've got these two, and this is how medicine is portrayed in the media, which is why I like them. So you've got, on the one hand, a family member who doesn't want their loved one to die. Very heartening, and I get that. And then you have another one, which I think is probably, especially as it relates to cancer, more appropriate or more poignant, is the physician, the patient knowing that they're dying, but the physician saying, no, you can't die, we've got something else we can try, and the patient saying, I'm ready to go, and the doctor saying no. Beautiful film clip. Yeah. Ask anything. I so respect that. Okay, so a DNR is different than withdrawing care. So a DNR, do not resuscitate order, and I could talk to you in spades about what our wonderful legislature just did around DNRs, but essentially this is an order that you need to get consent for that says we're not going to do chest compressions if someone's heart stops, which is different than withdrawing life support.
So the idea is appropriate in that situation. It's not a test of co-delivery.
Perhaps. I would have to know more facts, but they're two very different things. So again, when the heart, and the other thing that just to go further off of that and go off script a little bit, is the media so poorly portrays resuscitation. And if any of you have seen it, I love it, on all the great shows, it's like, boop, 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 boop. Okay, it is a very, very violent procedure. It will break your ribs. And in someone who is frail and fragile, it is of not benefit. And the success rate is actually very low. And so these DNR orders are written because it's really felt that even if we were to resuscitate a person, to what end? Because they're typically dying anyways. So it can actually cause quite a bit of harm. But we're going to talk about removing life support's a completely different thing. No, they're really entertaining. They're actually very, very entertaining, but really not very accurate, right? We all love them, but they're not accurate whatsoever. Anytime. Okay, so those were our two cases. The history of advanced care planning actually goes back to the 60s, where a very, very wise attorney by the name of Louis Kuttner said, wait a second, the Supreme Court has given us a right to refuse medical care. And we have had that right for a very, very long time. Everyone get that? We have a right to refuse medical care. So if we are no longer able to speak for ourselves, shouldn't we have that same right? So he actually proposed back in the 60s that we have something of an advance directive. There was actually this society called the Euthanasia Society. It was started in England. As you can imagine, it's not popular today. It certainly was not popular back then. So the first right to die case, everyone, this is probably Time Magazine. This was spread across all the headlines. Karen Ann Quinlan. It was a state case, and I think that's the important thing to know, but it was the first right to die case. And the parents, she had been in a persistent vegetative state for quite a long time, and the parents wanted to remove the support, and the New Jersey court basically said if everyone agreed, we can remove it because it may actually be more humane to remove the support than keep her on it. Interestingly enough, they removed it and she was able to breathe on her own and she lived for quite a long time afterwards. But it was a state case, so it did not carry precedence throughout. However, the wise people in California said, we should probably think about allowing patients to do what Louis Kuttner thought we should do. So they actually developed and instituted the first advance directive at about the same time as the Quinlan case. The first Supreme Court case was heard in the Cruzan. Now, I love this case simply because here, Nancy Cruzan was breathing on her own, but she was being kept alive with artificial nutrition and hydration. And I use these words very mindfully because, and Peggy, I'm sure you've seen it a lot of times, where if someone is being kept alive on artificial nutrition and hydration, the family's first reaction is, if we remove it, they're going to starve, right? Well, they're likely not enjoying this artificial supplement anyways. But again, we have so many cultural, there's such a cultural complexity to food and water that is wrapped up in this case. In the Cruzan case, the Supreme Court actually, and I have to go back, I apologize for this. In the Quinlan case, it was the hospital who was refusing to remove the support, and the doctors, and the family wanted it. In the Cruzan case, what the court said is that while patients have the right, or patients' families have the right to remove life support, it must be by clear and convincing evidence, which is the highest standard. So we have to know that this is what the patient would have wanted. And likewise, they said that the state also has a compelling interest in keeping people alive, and that those two things need to be balanced. So initially, the court said there's no clear and convincing evidence that Nancy Cruzan did not want to be kept alive. We always err on the side of life. And so she was kept on life support until some additional testimony came forward from a friend who was able to corroborate that they had had a conversation about this, and this is not how she would have wanted to live. And then we have the present, and we all know the Terry Schiavo case. And what Terry Schiavo taught us, if nothing else, is how unsettled this topic still is. So Terry Schiavo, in a persistent vegetative state, she was married for a long time. Her husband said this is not how she would want to live. Her parents intervened, and the tragedy there, and we're all, most of us are probably parents of one sort of another. Legally, her parents did not have standing. Her husband was the surrogate decision maker, the legal surrogate decision maker. He should have the entire time had the ability to direct this case, but the courts actually gave standing to her parents at the same time, which was, again, politically motivated because there was a movement to keep Terry alive, even though Terry may have not wanted to be kept alive. And as you know, this played out. Can you imagine if this was someone you loved? I mean, it was played out in the court of public opinion. The most private of matters splashed over the newspaper. And again, at the end of the day, after, do you remember Bush wanted to change the law in Florida to not allow, to require her to stay on life support? So even though we had advanced directives at this point in time, she didn't execute one, but we're still arguing over the sanctity of life and the rightful place of allowing people to make decisions and not stay on life support forever. So again, very unsettled. And then more recently, as in this past year, Schiavo McMath. Has anyone heard about this case? You've heard about it. Okay, so this is very, very tragic. In California, this sweet little girl went into the hospital for a tonsillectomy, okay, and she died. She died via brain death. So she had no stem cell activity. Here's her death certificate, and I am really hoping this one's going to work.
She meets all the criteria for brain death.
The two pediatric neurologists testified that they did extensive tests.
And what did you see in reviewing the EEG for Schiavo McMath on December 11, 2013?
There was no brain activity.
And both concluded 13-year-old Schiavo McMath did not have any clinical signs of life, according to established scientific criteria.
I'm going to have to, therefore, deny the petition.
So the judge ruled against Schiavo's family. While he did not say the hospital should pull the plug, what he did say is that he would give until December 30th at 5 p.m. for the family to decide what to do. After that, barring an appeal, the hospital would be allowed to remove Schiavo from life support.
Our sincere hope is that the family, between now and December 30th, finds peace and comes to grips with the judge's decision and reaches the conclusion that Schiavo McMath is deceased and that the family and children are able to cooperatively take steps before then.
I mean, with the decision, it's heartbreaking to hear that, of course. But our faith is still strong. There's still, it's Christmas Eve. There's still time for a miracle. So we still haven't given up there. It's just a judge ruling.
Will they appeal the judge's ruling? Schiavo's family says they need time to think about it. And they have a message for other families.
For everybody, love your children with all your heart. If you haven't told them today that you love them, go home right now. Call them. Call them on the phone and tell them how much they mean to you and how much you love them.
And make sure you hold them a little bit tighter this Christmas.
Yeah.
So, very famous study decades ago talking about what is death. So we have death by cardiovascular systems, whereas when your heart stops beating, but there's also something known as brain death when your brain stem no longer activates. It is not it is not directing the body to do anything. And and since we call it something different, because what happens when someone's brain dead is that we're able to sustain their organ systems on artificial life support. And so there's this thinking that, well, maybe they're not really dead. Because if you see someone who's brain dead in a bed next to someone who's not, you can't tell the difference, right? All their systems are running, but again, they're being run artificially. So we're further complicating this issue by putting some sort of weird hope with people, suggesting that, wait a second, maybe if you're dead, you're really not dead. And so watch what you ask for in your advanced care planning, because we can keep you alive. Now, the story goes something like this with Jahai, and it's tragic. The state of New Jersey has a very unique statute allowing otherwise brain dead people to be kept alive if discontinuing care conflicts with their religious beliefs. And this was done, I believe, as a nod to the Orthodox Jewish community, who does not believe in discontinuation of life support. So Jahai is in New Jersey on life support. Dead. She's dead. Okay? But again, big story. There is a absolutely beautiful, beautiful article about this in the New Yorker about 2 months ago that I'd Google if you were interested in, talking about just the complexities about this. And the reason I bring it up is, think about it. People may really believe, wait a second, if my loved one is declared brain dead, maybe they're not. Did you have a question? Everyone but New Jersey and New York. Oh, I'm so sorry. Which is beautiful that you agree to that. That's really what being on life support does, is it enables those organs to be kept fresh so that they could be used for someone else. But the people are dead. And so the fact that, again, we're planting in people's minds some hope that they're not is very problematic.
Well, it seems to me that occasionally there's a big flow of men who over 30 years comes along. I mean, have you heard this kind of, or are they just stuff like butter?
It happens. What we don't hear, and so you think there's miracles. Now, there's a difference between, and we're going to get into this in a second, various states. But the chances, if you're in a persistent vegetative state, the chances of you coming out of this after 30 days in it are pretty minimal. Here's what we don't know. This is what they don't tell you. In those instances where people do come out of it, it's with significant disability. It's not like you wake up and you are yourself again after 30 years, which is a quality of life issue. But it has happened. Yeah, Peggy.
I would also add that they studied the people who had come back, and they were all as the result of a traumatic brain injury instead of an anoxic brain injury where the brain goes without oxygen.
Because in a coma, or even in a persistent vegetative state, you still have you still have brain stem activities. And that's why you can breathe on your own, because your brain is still telling your lungs to breathe. When you're brain dead, your brain's not capable of doing that. And so it is the technology that is keeping that person going. And I wouldn't even say alive, just going. But again, reports like this, and the next one I'm going to show you, which is even more problematic. Did that answer your question, though?
I understand why people say, okay, let's keep the goal. Let's keep the goal. Because they have this in mind, but they don't understand it's a different kind of inspirational science than the car accident and the head.
Right.
In this case, did the parents argue that it was against their religion to take her off life support, or did they go ahead and the 30th of December, or whatever it was, that she went off life support and died.
No, she has remained on life support, and oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. No, she is dead and alive in New Jersey. Correct. Because, yes, ma'am.
As he says, there was constantly writing to his coaches and don't remember the period of time that he lived, but was on support. It was in that.
And I'm going to show you the next clip, which is further complicating this whole discussion, because this is about end-of-life planning, but I think it's important to frame it because these incidents causes doubt, right? Incidents like this. So let's watch the next one that I probably can't get up. So I am not sure if anyone read this. I thought fabulous piece of journalism that ran in the Houston Chronicle about 2 months ago about minimally conscious states. So I think I'm just going to try and cut and paste this without, no, it's not going to let me do that either. Houston Chronicle.
24 hours. And Mary told the doctor, you don't understand, that's between Nick and God. You're not going to be the one to decide. We were convinced from day one that Nick wasn't going to give up. So I had to find the best doctors in the nation. Within a short time, I don't know, 24, 36 hours, they met with us and told us not only is Nick not in a vegetative state, he's above minimally conscious. He is fully awake.
I think it was our second day here, the therapist discovered that he has a yes-no system.
Forward for yes and to the right for no. Do you feel nauseous?
You can see that Nick has held on for a reason, and so if he's holding on for a reason, we need to hold on.
Kick it out. Keep it there. You good job. Good. Hey, you're walking.
You just have to keep pushing, and you know that it's going to take time, but he's working to do it. Like little baby steps every day, but it's still those steps that we're taking that we were almost guaranteed that we would never be able to do.
There's all kinds of methods that they use, and it's stuff that, like they've imagined, you know?
There it comes.
You think they done pull this out of the woodwork, but it's these little gimmicks they use to try to light up the brain. It's tears forte, you know. This is the place that, I mean, this is their game in life. This is their game in medicine. They know how to reach in and look at these patients and say, you know, here's the potential and here's what's really going on with them.
You say goodbye. I say. Move that tongue, and then round these lips. Hello.
I can't ever imagine not being with them. You know, though we haven't said it yet, that's what you intend to do whenever you get married, you know? It's for better or for worse, it's sickness and health, and I can't just bail out just because somebody took him away, you know? He's still Nick. Whenever he smiles at different things that Nick would normally smile at, you know, his personality is still there. He's still a prankster. He still has this kind heart. He's still, you know, he's still him. So yeah, I do still feel like my best friend is here.
That's the thing. You've written the 70 songs. Say British. I love you. All right.
I would love to know what y'all think. I don't know. And in this series, again, if you're interested in this topic, I really invite you to read it, because what they also illustrate, I read it and I'll share with you afterwards my reaction to it. But at the very end, they portrayed someone who they thought was perhaps also in a minimally conscious state, who never was never awoken, for lack of a better word. And the family is still kind of hoping that something can be done. Ma'am? Oh. Thank you. Oh, the book was so good. Okay, Me Before You. Very tough. And whose quality, right? Who defines what that is? Which is a beautiful segue into advanced care planning. But before we get there, are there any other thoughts about this? So he was a firefighter. I mean, he was a police officer, and he was actually shot in the line of duty. And it was actually our former president who got him into TIR. So it's not as though, because getting into TIR, interestingly enough, for whatever it's worth, in order to be admitted to TIR, you have to be able to do a significant amount of hours of rehab every day. It's a rehab hospital, okay? And so if you are still too disabled to do the rehab, you will not get a bed there. And so he probably would not have qualified except for the president knocking on the door. And there is a researcher there and physician who, again, is studying these minimally conscious states, people who, or patients who were heretofore thought to be in persistent vegetative states, really have some consciousness going on. And the story illustrates just how far therapy and rehab can take someone like this.
It's that neuroplasticity that they're working on in the brain.
Yes.
But the thing about it is that unless I don't see what medical research benefit is, if there's some bogus, that there might be benefit of having somebody be studied like that person for that neuroplasticity, something like that, that in her case she wants him to be, this is a young couple, so that makes it different. But for somebody my age, my studies are done, but I was thinking that are they learning something that might help?
So just the neuroplasticity, once upon a time, not too long ago, it was thought that the brain could not rejuvenate itself, that when brain cells died, that was it. Well, once again, we were wrong. And they're learning that the brain is able to repair itself. But to what extent? He's not in a research protocol. He is just getting clinical care, which is, I just wanted to mention that too. Again, yeah.
I just, at the risk of disagreeing with my wife, I'm not really, it's just a different perspective. I would never disagree with that.
You are a wise man.
The perspective of someone changes. So this gentleman might have said, you know, oh, I never would want to live like that until he's put in that situation. And then you say, my gosh, I think I might have a chance of overcoming it. But anyway, I just want to see him, you know, I look out the window and see some birds and see him, you know, see my wife and, you know, better than not having anything. So the way we might look at it is that, yeah, this is the best I got. I'll try to improve on it, but in the meantime, I'll do the best I can.
And I am thrilled you brought that up, because that is really the most significant downside to advanced care planning, because you don't know what you want until you're there, right? And we hopefully none of us will be there, right? And so that is clearly the biggest obstacle, is not knowing that. By the way, me? No. And the thing is, we don't know what he wants. You know, when I was watching this and when I read the article, that's all I kept saying. I mean, he is not able to communicate what he wants. And so it's everyone else speaking for him. Right? But I'm so thrilled that you brought that up, because that is the significant issue that we have. And we don't know. It's the only truth, right? But it is a truth that we are trying to fight, which is, we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm glad you brought that up. So we have Schiavo McMath in New Jersey, legally brain dead, but being kept alive by artificial means. And then we've got this initiative going on right down the street, suggesting that, wait a second, patients in a PVA may not be in a PVA, and there may be something we can do. And I raise this only because it is additional obstacles to having meaningful end-of-life conversations with people. Because, you know, and there is some hope, and I'm not suggesting that there may not be some hope, but it has to be realistic hope. And in this instance, I'm not really sure how realistic some of this is. Okay, no more videos that we have to go through. So I just want you to see, I love this cartoon. Just so you know, I never want to live in a vegetative state dependent on some machine. If that ever happens, just unplug me, okay? And she unplugs the TV. So we've got this idea, again, going back to 1967, I didn't speak about it, it was on the slide. In 1990, the federal government legislated the Patient Determination Act, which requires any facility that takes Medicare and Medicaid dollars, i.e. every facility, to ask patients who are being admitted what end-of-life plans that they have executed, and if they need any help doing that. Perhaps not the best time to have those conversations, right? You're going in for bunion surgery, and they're asking you about your end-of-life plans, right? And you're thinking, I didn't think it was that serious. But that was the government's effort, the federal government's effort to begin forcing healthcare institutions to do this. So we've got, in front of you, you have the Texas Advanced Directive. You don't need to look at it. There's been a movement underfoot more recently to get more people to execute advance directives. As you can see here, the number of people who have executed, and this is actually the most recent number I have, but the number of people who have actually executed an advance directive is so drastically low. It's shameful how few people have actually done this, especially if you want to be discontinued. I mean, we are always going to err on the side of life in the hospital, but if that's not what you want, this is why these are here. Ma'am. No. No, and here's the thing. You don't have to complete one. So the law, the self-determination law, is not saying that you must have an advance directive, because then the percentage would be far greater than what you see up here. What they're just saying is we're going to make you aware that there are these planning documents out there. So you do not have to have a copy. Well, you may want to have a copy. Again, for my bunion surgery, I am not bringing a copy of the advance directive. I'm a little more optimistic than that. Maybe I should. And we're going to go through the different tools and how to do those. But right now, most hospitals, it would be nice to have an electronic medical record that everyone has access to. We don't have that. But no, you don't have to have a copy. It's just kind of a heads up. So again, the number of people actually executing advanced care planning documents is so low. And you can see here, I think I have it up here, the people who execute them, better educated, white, more affluent. So I'm not going to poll you, but I would suspect that many of the people in this room may have one. And so we've had a really rough time getting the word out to underserved communities and communities of color. And there's some additional historical challenges in doing that as well that I'm not going to get into. Any other thoughts or comments? So if you take your advance directive out, this is what I'm going to ask you to do that. It says directives to physicians, families, or surrogates. So in the state of Texas, this is the document, and we're going to talk about how grossly poorly this is. So an advance directive only takes effect if you, A, can no longer speak for yourself, A, and B, you have to be in either a terminal condition, which means you have an illness that is not curable and you're expected to die within 6 months. Little footnote, we have no idea how long people will live. Okay, so that's the one thing. Or a terminal condition, again, an incurable condition. Oh, that was terminal. Irreversible, okay. Again, something that can never be cured, person can't care for themselves, and without life-sustaining treatment, they would die. So this is the only time this takes effect. Again, you can't speak for yourself, and you've got one of these two things. So, for example, if someone has Alzheimer's, and they can't speak for themselves, okay, would this take effect? No, because, it's okay, because, why? I'm sorry, I'm in teacher mode now. Huh? Right, it's not terminal, it's not 6 months, and they're not on life support. Right? This was actually a very controversial issue in Netherlands, which is the only country that allows euthanasia for physicians to actually participate in euthanizing a patient. They are allowing patients with dementia to be euthanized. In this country, no one allows that. It's Netherlands. Really? Belgium allows it too? Okay. The Netherlands was the... You think? Okay, I wasn't familiar with Belgium. So the movie, Me Before You, the book, he was just a no, I shouldn't say that. He was a quadriplegic. So none of these, he wasn't on life support, and he wasn't terminal. So in the United States, he had capacity. So this, again, he would have to take his own life if he no longer wanted to live. So this does not apply. It only applies to very significant illnesses towards the end of life when you are on life support. Everyone have that? Oh, there should have been something else. Huh. I'm missing something. Okay, so some of the other problems with advanced directives, as we all saw, this is a legal document. So as a legal document, it does not provide us with the ability to, it doesn't prompt us to think about what we would want at all. It just says yes or no, right? Do you want the life support or don't you want the life support? Either or. There's no, well, there's a couple of lines you can fill in to qualify what you may or may not want. But the fact that it's a legal document does not allow it to really delve in to some of the issues that I think we're going to talk about right after this. So that's the first issue. The second issue is, as we just said, it has diagnostic prerequisites. So again, you have to be in either a terminal or an irreversible state in order for the advanced directive to even take place. Third, there's some limitations. I don't know if you remember the case coming out of Fort Worth a couple years ago, but if you are pregnant and on life support, and even if you're terminal, you cannot disconnect the support. Okay, I don't know if that's a problem for too many people in this room, but for your loved ones, again, and again, this idea that we are going to put the priorities of the fetus ahead of the priorities of the patient. That's exactly what that's doing in that prerequisite. The other thing that the state legislature brings up every other year when they meet is they're always lobbying to require artificial hydration and nutrition. So every other year, the hospital has to send a group up there because, again, it's artificial. But there is a significant movement underfoot to require artificial hydration and nutrition. Again, this idea that it's ordinary type of care. And then lastly, and what I want to talk about going further is, if you execute this, which I hope you all do, that's one of the points of this, is encouraging people to execute an advanced directive, especially, again, if you do want to limit care towards the end of life, it doesn't require a conversation. And so this goes something like this. As you can imagine, I am everyone's surrogate decision maker in my family. They'll call me up. I just redid all my legal documents, Rebecca, and you're my surrogate decision maker. And I say, great, what do you want? You know. No, I don't know. Well, you know. And so the problem with executing legal documents is it doesn't require that conversation. Because guess what? I think I know, but I don't know. I really don't know what my siblings want. And so, yes, I do force them to tell me, and at least I initiate a conversation about, okay, let's talk about the different scenarios. You need to tell me, you need to be able to articulate to me what you want, because guess what? One of the hardest things is, as a surrogate decision maker, so let's say I'm Peggy's surrogate decision maker, she's on life support at the end of life. If I don't know what she wants, I'm being told that, there's nothing that medicine can do, she's gonna die, that we should probably withdraw care. If I don't know what Peggy wanted, that burden is on me. And so if nothing else, having that conversation alleviates your loved ones from carrying that burden with them. And I'm sure some of you have had to make those decisions for loved ones, and it is a very heavy burden. So if you can alleviate those that come behind you of that burden, you are doing a very good deed. The problem is when we don't know. And here's the interesting thing. You can't execute an advance directive saying you want to be kept on all life support. And we will honor that. We will absolutely honor that, except if perhaps it's futile or it's harmful. Because sometimes people are kept on life support and that support is actually harming them rather than helping, especially if they're dying. But absolutely. But if you know that you don't want, if you're in a, again, terminal or irreversible state and you don't think you'd want to be kept on life support, again, so we're talking end of life stuff. We're not talking necessarily here. Then you should execute one and tell your loved ones what you want. The other reason you should tell your loved ones what you want is because they are in a very powerful position to overturn it, especially if the hospital doesn't have a document. So most people, as you saw, don't have an advance directive, and so it plays out something like, I'm now in the hospital, I'm not married, Peggy's my sister, I don't have any kids, so she's now my surrogate decision maker, and you need to tease out what would be in my best interest, what would I have wanted? So that's what we ask surrogate decision makers to try and decide, is to make a decision based on what their loved one would have wanted. What we see, or I should say what I see, is Peggy typically, and most family members, make decisions based on their best interests. And that's human nature. Like, I get that, right? That's how we roll. Right? We're going to do things in our own self-interest. So again, helping, the more I can help Peggy understand what I would have wanted, the better off we all are, because it is really hard to make that decision. Sir? Okay, go on. That would be disclosure statement for medical power of attorney. No. No, I'm just putting this out here. So your question is very well founded. Most people have not executed one of these. Okay? This enables you to appoint who you would like to be your surrogate decision maker. Since most people do not complete one of these, the law provides in its stead who will be your decision maker. So if you're married, it is going to be your spouse. If you're not married and you're younger, it would be your parents. Okay? Then it's your children. Then it's any breathing relative. No, I'm serious. I mean, the social workers in the hospitals go to extreme measures to find next of kin. About what? Oh, organs.
I've been thinking about it ever since. Because if this was an adult, we didn't have access to the bills that we did. I know it costs $500. We didn't have access to that, but we did make the decisions on when to pick up what to do with our head.
So the way it actually works in reality, and again, where the Schiavo case was both alarming and soothing at the same time is suppose you are the surrogate decision maker, you and your wife. And suppose, okay, no, let's do it the other way around. Suppose she was married, okay? The law recognizes the spouse as the legal surrogate decision maker. The parents are not going to be thrown out of the room, okay? They are going to include the entire family, and let me tell you, some of these families are wicked big. I lead a very boring life. They're huge, with many spouses and many children from many spouses, et cetera, et cetera. And they're going to, we listen to all of those voices. At the end of the day, though, someone has to make that decision, and that is going to go to, in your case, it was you and your ex-wife. Now, if you two didn't agree, which we see a lot of times, they're going to give you time and they're going to help you work through it. Okay. Again, a very, very wise man. Interestingly enough, in Texas, I find this kind of baffling, and I know we're in a religious institution, for medical decisions, not withdrawing or withholding care, but for end-of-life decisions, if there's no family and there's no medical power of attorney, we actually engage community clergy to make decisions on behalf of patients, which I just find very interesting. It's not our hospital chaplains. They contract with outside clergy to do that. In the case of end-of-life decisions, it's two physicians not familiar with the case who can make that decision as to whether or not to remove life support. But again, they will find the distant second cousin, twice removed, living on the other side of the country, who, quite frankly, incidentally, you don't have to make the decision. So if you are the next of kin of some distant relative who you've never spoken to, which would be very awkward to make that decision, you do not have to accept that responsibility. Ma'am. Oh, TPA. So let me alleviate your fears a little bit. So another document, out of hospital, do not resuscitate. So think about you are suffering a stroke. Guess what? You're neither in a terminal or irreversible condition. Okay? So a DNR is a... Oh, yeah, it's the second or third leading cause of death in the country. Okay, so this is a fabulous, I'm really thrilled you brought this up. So off script a little bit. So the DNR that we talked about earlier, completely different beast. So the only time you're going to have a DNR order is if you are really, really, I'm going to put another really in there, sick, okay? And the physicians think, A, it is not going to help and it's going to do more harm, okay? So that's the first thing. Second is, if you call emergency medical services, so let's say you have a DNR and you're at home. You call EMS, they come to the house. They have a legal responsibility to treat you. Otherwise, why are you calling them? Because they are not in a position to make that determination. So there is actually a separate document in Texas, it's called an out-of-hospital DNR, that would apply to EMS in nursing homes, for example. So any place but the hospital, if your heart was to stop, there is an obligation to resuscitate you unless you have this out-of-hospital DNR. Absolutely. There is a presumption that if you're being brought in by an ambulance, that they are going to save you. So for those of you, this is another interesting tidbit, is if you've ever had any experience with hospice care, one of the things that they will pound you over the head with, and I love hospice, I've had the best experience with it, is, again, people don't want aggressive treatment, right? So and there's been some really interesting studies, so they are so adamant, please do not call EMS if your loved one seems to be in distress, because they will treat them. Because they have a legal responsibility to treat them. And so it goes without saying, if you present to an emergency room, you're giving implied consent to be treated. And again, you don't meet that condition yet. Now, after your stroke has resolved for good or bad, you may then be in a terminal or irreversible state. But at the time of crisis, you're not. And it's always going to be erred on the side to treat. Is that helpful? Okay, a little bit? The terminal, again, is someone who has been sick for a long time. So, I mean, those are acute events, right? We're talking, I mean, predominantly we're talking congestive heart failure, we're talking cancer. We are typically not talking about those other things. And again, part of the conversation is, should we be talking about those other things? And again, it's not until you need life support. So most stroke people who have suffered from a stroke are not on life support. I mean, it might be temporary life support, but you're not on a ventilator forever. You're not on IV fluids or whatever. So that's where it's different. We're talking about, very aggressive life support that you will die without. So that.
Remember too, the different kinds of stroke. The TPA only has the clot stroke, and you can't tell until
Well, there's now a mobile stroke unit, which is done. My IRB is actually responsible for that study, so I'm privileged to see the results. And the sooner they can get that TPA, the better. But that other there's a mobile MRI in it. Yeah. It's UT. No, UT here. UT Houston. Tell them you're having a stroke. You see all this publicity out here knowing the warning signs for a stroke? It's all over because, as she said, especially if it's an ischemic stroke, TPA is very beneficial, but it has to be applied fairly quickly. So yeah, you just say so-and-so's having a stroke, and they will call out the stroke unit. Oh, I knew you don't know. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm like, ooh, I don't know the medical thing for that.
Hemorrhagic stroke, unless they can go in and repair, and most of the time it's shooting on the head, and depending on the severity, it's actually the more serious kind of stroke to have. Because if you have a massive hemorrhagic stroke, there's nothing they can do for you.
We know enough just to be really dangerous. We should probably, seriously.
I was a chaplain in critical care for a number of years.
So there are a number of problems with these documents. It's what we have to complete. That's what the state of Texas has told us. And what I want to do is now unsuccessfully show you some other things. So have you heard of a POLST, Physician Order of Life-Sustaining Treatment? So this was actually, this is fascinating. This originated in Oregon in response to EMS resuscitating people that didn't want resuscitated, interestingly enough. So the state created what they called was a physician order for life-sustaining treatment, and it is yet another document that you have. It's under most, though, medical order for scope of treatment, a most form. This form, unlike an advanced directive, is actually something that a physician signs. Okay, so this isn't something that you contemplate now, but in the hospital, you're very ill, and so you have to have capacity. That's number one thing. So you're very ill, you're in the hospital, and your doctor would have a conversation with you about the extent to which you want different life support treatments, given your condition. So it's a physician order, okay, so you don't get to execute it, your physician executes it. In Texas, because we like to complicate something, it does not replace an advanced directive or an out-of-hospital do not resuscitate, like the good folks in Oregon wanted it to do. And then lastly, it doesn't involve, I'm all about this, it does not involve a conversation with your loved ones. This is a conversation you have with your physician. So your physician is on board. That is a good thing. It also happens when you're very ill, which we could debate whether that's good or bad. You may be in a much better place to decide what kind of life support you want when you're in that crisis, but you may not. And the research is kind of all over the place. And Peggy, I would welcome you to talk a little bit more about this. But the research is really all over the place as to when these discussions should be held. I did some work for the VA recently, and they have a very strict protocol that by the third visit with a primary care physician, there will be an end-of-life conversation. Boom. And so it raises the question is when would you, I'd ask you the question, when would you want your physician, if at all, to have this conversation with you?
The one day has a group called Ariadne Labs, which is doing, they call it the Serious Illness Conversation Guide. And they're training GPs, because remember when you go into the hospital, you may not have your GP.
No, you're not going to have your GP. Not anymore. Right, not anymore.
You won't have your own doctor. So they're doing this at the GP level, or internist level, and have conversations with all patients who have had a serious illness, and they use it as the surprise question. Would you be surprised if this patient died in the next year? And to target those things. And they have a really good kind of template to follow.
That is one I'm not familiar with.
And then there's another one for people to use.
Well, there's a whole host. I mean,
Caring conversation.
I have a whole bunch here. So my favorite is actually, and again, I have no financial interest in this company. It's called mydirectives.com. And this is a web-based advanced directive. It does meet the standards for the state of Texas. And what it does, it takes you through a series. Have you gone to them?
Yes, I do.
It takes you through a series of questions to help you understand kind of what your values are for when you are at the end of life, which you don't know, to your point, right? You don't know what you're going to want. But at least it raises the questions that we all should be thinking about. And they give you scenarios. Would you want this? Would you want that? And then leading to the actual form where you would make some designations. but again, forces you to have a conversation, if not with a loved one, with yourself, about what your true wishes are. And then this can be potentially accessed by a variety of people as long as you give them the code to get in there. Yeah. The caring code, there's a whole host of them. Yeah. It's okay. It's okay.
I understand that your primary care doctor likely wouldn't be at the hospital. In my case, a primary care doctor, if I was at I guess Memorial Herman, they wouldn't even have as many privileges, so I couldn't go there anyway. Is there what point do you sort of segue and have a geriatrician? Is it a geriatrician?
Geriatrician.
Person doctor? I guess that's what they are, right? And so I know they've got some at UT.
They do.
Is there one or more? Of course, that's a specialized question and maybe not fair to the whole group. But one of the things that they said being moral was that he really lamented the fact that there weren't many geriatric doctors.
Wonderful observation. So my parents, may they rest in peace, were in God's waiting room, AKA South Florida, where there were no geriatricians. You would think, right? This is South Florida, right? Not a one. So here's the problem. It's the irony, is that most medical students, because I've done some research in this, they don't want to deal with old people, right? But if they're doing adult medicine, the majority of their patients are going to be older adults. I mean, that's who gets sick, right? So it's a kind of an irony there. Just so you know, the way geriatricians are educated is that they are educated around quality of life issues more so than just regular primary care physicians. And so that is who you could have a really robust conversation with. And I have the name of a fabulous one, if you want it.
I'd rather have that as my go-to doctor than, just people here that have to pick up my throat.
But again, the idea is what's important to you and how can we maintain your functioning for as long as possible, recognizing that, by the time you're 65, you're going to have 3 or more chronic illnesses. That is the average. Yeah, not rosy. I mean, this crowd looks pretty healthy. 65. That's mining data, Medicare data. So, I mean, and again, we see a lot, but you'd be shocked. As we live in a pretty unhealthy country. It's because people aren't, right? And the thing is, we've gotten very good at keeping people alive. So diseases that you heretofore would have died from in the past, you don't anymore, which is good news, bad news. Okay, so we've got a couple things, and here's the interesting thing. This has become an industry now, like everything else. The My Directives is a free app, if you will, or service. Some of these actually cost money, but they're all of the same cloth. They're all cut out of the same cloth. They provide you with tools to have conversations about your value system for when you do reach the end of life. So I would encourage you to look at them. I'm not going to try to link them again. They're not that fabulous. If it was easy, I'd do it. But take a look at them, and again, supplement it with the state-required documents that we have that you have to do, unless you do the My Directives, which is legitimate. So I just want to recap where we've been. So we have this torrid history where we're still denying that people die. Okay, and I think the McMath case is so illustrative of that. We have an otherwise dead person being kept on life support in New Jersey because the family really thinks that something could change. And brain plasticity is not that plastic. You know, I mean, that is something that I don't think we will ever reverse. And even if we did, she has lost oxygen to her brain so that she will never have a functioning brain again. And then we also have this research into what we know as minimally conscious states. And so a lot of people could fall into that category, and I struggle with the extent to which we should be promoting this. And it's something someone, I think it may have been you, because when I read that article, the other thing that caught me was, who's going to pay for this? Okay, so just another little anecdote. When Medicare was legislated in 1965, life expectancy, anyone know? 67. Okay, so the government was never going to go broke on Medicare because we weren't living that long. Now the life expectancy for those of you in your room is late 70s, early 80s. So we now add on, you know, this idea that we can give extensive rehabilitative services to certain individuals. And I can't help but wonder, who is going to pay for that? We're going to pay for that, and the big W, whether it be through higher premiums or higher taxes. Someone's going to have to pay for that. And so we really need to have some sort of rich analysis around the benefits of this and whether or not it can really prove to be beneficial. So we talked about the history and how unsettled we are with respect to this notion of end of life. We are sorely, again, we are so reluctant as a society to execute advance directives, I think in part because we don't think we are going to die. And I do have this terrible nightmare, and I'm going to write, if I could draw, I'd have this cartoon where, you know, we're going to have wards in hospitals where people are lined up on life support. We have the technology to do that. Is that where we want to go? And that's, I think, why we have some sort of moral obligation to think about these issues ahead of time. When we're working with students, they all have to go through a session where they contemplate completing an advance directive. None of them do. The number one thing, the number one cause of death of that age group is going to be an accident. So it's not going to be a terrible disease, it's going to be some terrible accident. And so it's something that everyone should at least begin thinking about if you have strong views. So in conclusion, I have poignant marks on this. So we've got technology that is further complicating our conversations. And as someone, I think as you mentioned, it's not stopping, it's only growing. I mean, our ability to actually address some of medicine's thornier issues, I think is still to come. We've got CRISPR technology so that if you've got a gene for some terrible disease, we will have the ability to cut that out and replace it with a corrected gene. I mean, that is coming. So again, technology is, I think, eroding our ability to think mindfully about end-of-life issues. And again, technology is always quicker than the ethics and our ability to really understand it. The second issue is culture. This is a uniquely American issue. The West in general has it, but America in particular. And part of it has to do with how we fund healthcare, because we have this schizophrenic private-public partnership. There is essentially a blank check, and we really think that, you know, we can pay our way out of death, but we can't. And so until we start having very mindful conversations about end of life, that it is going to come, we'll continue to live in this culture, I call it a culture of denial, that we can somehow avoid with technology ever dying. The third issue is the law. So the law now allows all of us to execute what we would want for the end of life. And again, to your point, it's only when we're in a terminal state or an irreversible state that this is going to take effect. But the law does allow us to make those decisions when we can no longer speak for ourselves. What I find really interesting, and it's a completely different topic, is if you think of all the social changes that we have witnessed over the last 20 years, and I'm talking primarily civil rights for the LGBT community, the legalization of cannabis, what has gone at a snail's pace is this idea of physician-assisted suicide. Physician-assisted suicide. So this idea that we could get some, so let's say you want to die. You're,
I was looking at this question and I was distracted. I didn't hear what.
oh, the law. So the law is also not preventing, I'm trying to think of the right word, but the law is not making it easier for us to have these conversations because they have set parameters around when we can remove life support in what circumstances. And the last civil rights issue, I mean, that's moving at a snail's pace, is this idea of physician-assisted suicide, where you're not on life support, but you are dying. You are dying. I mean, in the states that have legalized physician-assisted suicide, you have to be dying. You have to be of sound mind. But you would like to do it a little quicker. We have been very reticent to legalize that. It has been a very, very slow-moving phenomena. But again, different lecture. So the law, again, impacts this. And then lastly, accountability. So, and I mentioned it before, but who's accountable for this? And again, I would urge all of you to take your life, including the end of life, and help your loved ones so when you can't speak for yourself, they know what you want. I really believe we all have a moral obligation to do that in this age of technology-driven medicine, and in a culture where perhaps we can be kept alive past our normal functioning life. And with that, I encourage you all to complete those forms, and I thank you for your participation.